Concluded. Questions without notice. The Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is addressed to the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister said that tax cuts would be legislated before the 1st of July. He said that the member for Durack would remain Environment Minister, and he said that the government would create a National Integrity Commission. Were any of those commitments true?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I'm very thankful to the Leader of the Opposition for raising the issue of our commitment to tax cuts. Mr Speaker, those tax cuts, which not only provide tax relief today, but provide tax relief to Australians out into the future as well, Mr Speaker, for Australians. So the harder they work, the more they earn, the more they keep of what they earn, Mr Speaker. That's what we promised to the Australian people, and that's what we delivered. And the Labor Party sought to oppose us every single step of the way, Mr Speaker, and they remain opposed to tax relief. And if they are elected into this place, Mr Speaker, at a subsequent election, they will roll back the tax relief that has been legislated for the Australian people. And even now, some several months after the election, the Labor Party continues to tear itself apart about its $387 billion of higher taxes. They've got those members over there who are clinging on to those taxes for dear life. They work so hard to put that massive tax burden in their election platform to take them to the Australian people, and now they know they have to make a choice. Are you going to tax Australians more, or are they going to follow the government's approach and ensure they get their expenditure under control, that government lives within its means, that it can deliver the essential services that Australians rely on? That's what my government is delivering.
Has the Prime Minister concluded his answer? The Prime Minister's concluded his answer. I'll call the member for Hinkler.
Well, thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Will the Prime Minister inform the House about how the Morrison government is on the side of Australians who want to get off welfare and into work and create stronger communities?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I thank the member for his question, because he knows that if you want to get people off welfare into work, you've got to make sure your welfare system is supporting people to get onto work. And our government has seen that in 4 years, 230,000 people are now no longer dependent on income supports welfare payments from the government. And I'll tell you why. It's because they've got jobs. In the last 12 months, to the end of June, 296,000 Australians got a job, and over 80% of those were full-time jobs. Mr Speaker, we have the lowest level of welfare dependency of the working-age population in more than 30 years, Mr Speaker. That's what we're seeing under this government. We're seeing people get off welfare and to get into work, and that is the best form of support any Australian government can provide to the Australian people. But you've also got to make sure your welfare system does the right thing by those who are receiving it in the communities in which they live. And that's why we have put in place the cashless debit card. And in particular, in the members' electorate in Bundaberg and Hervey Bay from the 29th of January this year, that trial commenced, quarantining welfare support from the purchase of alcohol or gambling products where those purchases have caused drug, alcohol misuse and problem gambling. On the 25th of March of this year, we said we'd be continuing trials at the existing sites in Ceduna and East Kimberley in the Goldfields, as well as, of course, continuing those trials in Bundaberg and Hervey Bay. Now, this is an initiative of our government that is getting results and is changing communities, and the evidence backs that up. Falls in drug and alcohol uses, decreases in crime, violence and antisocial behaviour, improvements in child health and well-being, improved financial management and ongoing and even strengthened community support for the very initiatives. Because we went to those communities and we said we want to partner with you in terms of how we deliver welfare support into your communities. And it wasn't just in Indigenous communities, it was in all communities, Mr Speaker, where there was disadvantage, and there are communities who wanted to get people off welfare and into work and get the right supports. And the independent evaluation released on these cases found a 41% of participations drinking less frequently, 48% of participations using drugs less frequency, 48% of those who gamble people before the trial can be now doing it less often. Mr Speaker, we're on the side of communities that want to change their communities for the better and not have a welfare system that holds them back, but a welfare system that lifts them up, strengthens their communities and enables them to get more and more of their people into jobs. Because under this government we're creating jobs, and under this government we're running a welfare system which is a hand up, Mr Speaker, not out, one that understands that the best form of welfare is a job, Mr Speaker, and through programs like the cashless debits card, which is supported by this side of the House and opposed by that side of the House, are a success.
The member for Barton.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Government Services. On Monday night, when speaking on ABC television about the Robo-debt program, the Minister said, and I quote, "The department won't be going back after 7 years in terms of recovering that." Why did the Minister say that when he knew at the time it was untrue?
The Minister for Government Services has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Let me thank the member for her question. The government is moving forward on collecting or seeking income compliance debts from 2013-2014. There are still existing debts where customers have been sought to respond to from prior to that year. But when it comes to the issue of income compliance, Mr Speaker, it's important to understand where this all began. If I refer to Rick Morton's article in January 6, 2017 in The Australian, he writes, "Labor's leadership team of Bill Shorten and Tanya Plibersek pioneered the Robo-debt data matching scheme." Pioneered, it turns out the member for Sydney and the member for Maribyrnong are the virtual godparents of Robo-debt. Now, where would Rick Morton have got that from?
Members on both sides.
Rick Morton got that from a media release dated the 29th of June 2011, a joint media release issued by the member for Sydney and the member for Maribyrnong. The media release says new data matching to recover millions in welfare dollars.
The minister will just resume his seat for a second. It's okay. The member for Barton on a point of order.
Yes, relevance, Mr Speaker. The question is absolutely about
members on my right.
Why you misled the public on the 7:30
The member
report
for
on
Barton
Monday night.
will resume his seat. I'm listening to the minister. He's at this point relating his material to the question that's been asked. I'm listening very closely. Minister
It says a
has
new
the call.
data matching initiative between Centrelink and the Australian Tax Office is expected to claw back millions of dollars from welfare recipients who have debts with the Australian government. The Minister for Human Services, Tanya Plibersek, and the Assistant Treasurer, Bill Shorten, today said the new initiative will enhance Centrelink's debt recovery ability and is expected to recover $71 million over 4 years. Beginning on July the 1st this year, Centrelink and the ATO will automatically match data on a daily basis as a way of cross-checking former welfare recipients who have a debt with the Commonwealth. But if people fail to come to an arrangement to settle their debts, the government has a responsibility to taxpayers to recover that money. Well, can I say to the former leader and deputy leader, we agree. We absolutely agree. Can I say to the godfather and the godmother of income compliance from 2011 from the media release, and I'll table it just for the efficacy and good memories of the Leader of the Opposition and the Deputy Leader, income compliance data matching on a daily basis was started by those opposite, and now they seek to stop it in some faux degree of indignation that the income compliance love child of the godparents isn't what they hoped it to be. Well, we've got news for the opposition. What they began, we will continue to move forward in the interests of the Australian taxpayer.
Can someone find the ball?
The member for Page has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, my question is to the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Infrastructure, Transport and Regional Development. Will the Deputy Prime Minister update the House on who is on the side of Australians in rural and regional Australia who want to see their local communities grow and create more jobs?
The Deputy Prime Minister has the call.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. And just for the member Barnes' reference, we're on this side and you're on that side, and get used to it. Mr Speaker, drought notwithstanding, Mr Speaker, there are jobs in regional Australia, Mr Speaker. There are success stories in regional Australia, Mr Speaker. It's a vibrant, happening place of inventive, innovative people, Mr Speaker. Far too often, Mr Speaker, country Australia is portrayed as being broken. Far from it, Mr Speaker. There are good people, hard-working people, and they're creating jobs. They're creating employment opportunities. They're creating, Mr Speaker, investment. The people of rural and regional Australia know that the Nationals and the Liberals are on their side, Mr Speaker. More than 8.8 million people, Mr Speaker, now live, work and raise families outside of our capital cities, and we want to increase that number. We want to increase that number. There are now more than 600 government initiatives focused on creating jobs, focused on driving economic growth in our regions. Because as the member for Page knows, and the member for Lyne often says, Mr Speaker, when our regions are strong, so too is our nation. Since we came to government in 2013, we've committed almost $33 billion to economic and social infrastructure programs which specifically benefit rural and regional Australia. That's a remarkable figure. It's a good figure, and it's an appropriate figure. We've increased investment in the regions, reinforcing it as the engine room of the economy, Mr Speaker. It's being driven by our $60 billion agriculture sector, Mr Speaker, which we're hoping to grow to $100 billion by 2030. We've got a plan to do that. Our resources, our energy exports, Mr Speaker, are forecast to reach a new record level of $285,000 million this financial year, and this screams jobs. Jobs. And the member for Page knows how to create jobs, Mr Speaker. In his electorate, we've invested $4.7 million under the Regional Jobs and Investment Package in expanding Whitten Group's Kyogle Aged Care Centre. This project created almost 100 construction jobs and another 15 permanent roles for people living in the area. Whitten Group CEO Chris Mammarellis said that funding is helping to keep people in the local community, near their loved ones, near their support groups, near their friends. He said older Australians can access quality aged care in the communities they know and love, keeping them connected to the people that enrich their lives. So true. And under the government's $272 million regional growth program, we're investing almost $15 million in extending Norco's Lismore ice cream facility, which is also in the member for Page's electorate. And this program is going to help secure the jobs of 830 employees across the whole of the Norco business and ensure the sustainability of the cooperative's 200 farmer members. And so it's great news for the region. It's great news for the dairy industry. We're funding thousands of job-creating opportunities. And, Mr Speaker, I'm not sure about you, but I'm pretty partial to Norco's mango and vanilla.
Okay. I thank the Deputy Prime Minister. I might take that one on notice. The member for Corio.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And my question is to the Treasurer. Why did the Treasurer say yesterday Australians were certainly better off than in 2013, when the data shows that since 2013 wages have been stagnant, household debt has risen, growth has slowed, and median household income has declined in real terms?
The Treasurer has the call.
Well, Mr Speaker, Australians are better off than they were in 2013 because we've created 1.4 million new jobs, Mr Speaker. Thank you for that, Dixer, I say to the member for Corio, because when we came to government, unemployment was 5.7%, Mr Speaker. Today, it is 5.2%, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, when we came to government, the gender pay gap was 17.2%, Mr Speaker. Today, it is 14.2% and a record low, Mr Speaker. When we came to government, employment growth was around 0.7% per year, Mr Speaker. Today, it's 2.4%, Mr Speaker. And, Mr Speaker, the other reason why Australians are better off today is because tax cuts have passed this parliament, Mr Speaker. 13 million Australians are getting tax cuts because of what we have done on this side of the House, Mr Speaker. Because unlike Sir Tax-a-Lot over there, unlike Sir Tax-a-Lot, and I knight him today, I knight him, Sir Tax-a-Lot, we are not promising $387 billion of higher taxes, Mr Speaker. We are not telling the people of Corio and the people of Greenlaw and the people of Rankin and the people of McMahon that we're going to put a retirees tax on them. But they are, Mr Speaker. We're not telling them there's going to be an increased tax on superannuation, but you are, Mr Speaker, they are, Mr Speaker. And we're not telling them that we are going to burden family businesses and income earners with higher taxes, because on this side of the House we want Australians to earn more and to keep more of what they earn.
The member for Kennedy.
PM, with lowest ever interest rates, Reserve urging infrastructure, surely it's time for money-making projects, not, please, eye-catching, vote-winning, debt-making projects. Would you not agree it's time for your Hells Gate proper, Bradfield Stage 1, providing protein for our VIP markets, 1.5% of our electricity, 7% of our petrol, ethanol, 8% of our beef. With new ag technology, all clean, cheap, renewable forever. Was Bradfield right? Dead Heart, now Girrawheenah, land of flowers.
The PM, I just call the Prime Minister if he can address himself to the questions that were contained within that statement.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Kennedy's passion for ensuring that we move forward with the vital water infrastructure projects that our country needs, not just the north of Australia, but how that can support the rest of the country, which I know motivates him as well. Now, Mr Speaker, he will know that we've worked closely with him to establish the North Queensland Water Infrastructure Authority in March of this year, and that is taking forward a number of major projects of which he's very familiar, and includes the Hells Gate Dam, which includes the Brigwocks Weir, and that's a $54 million commitment at this point, and of course the Hewenden Irrigation Scheme, which is a very significant project in the member's electorate, and that is $182 million committed to it. There's the Rookwood Weir of $176 million. There's the Mareeba Dimboola Water Supply Scheme and the Nagoa Mackenzie Water Supply Scheme. Now, the Hells Gate Dam is a critical piece of infrastructure. In April this year, the Hells Gate Dam project took another step forward, with Townsville Enterprise Limited selected to start the pre-construction and planning work on that project. The Coalition is also investing up to $24 million in that part of the project, and there's $30 million to fast-track the construction of the Big Rocks Weir. Now, this is coming out of the $500 million expansion of the National Water Infrastructure Fund, and that fund, together with the further work that is being done by the Deputy Prime Minister, is to bring forward the National Water Grid. And the National Water Grid is Bradfield for the 21st century, Mr Speaker. That's what is necessary in this country. And as the National Water Grid is brought together by the Deputy Prime Minister, working with communities, working with agricultural communities, and working with all of those who are so essential to the success of this project, we will be bringing forward that National Water Grid to deliver on the very initiatives that the member has determined. We have a policy to ensure that our agricultural sector reaches that $100 billion mark by 2030, and that means ensuring we have the water infrastructure, that we have the soils to produce that, so we can become and continue to become the food bowl of the nation for nations like Vietnam and Indonesia and the Philippines, which you've referred to. But not just there, Mr Speaker, all around the country. So I want to thank the member for Kennedy's commitment to this project and the many other projects, but particularly all of my members on this side of the House who are so keen to see us get on with those water infrastructure projects, and that's exactly what my government will do.
The member for Longman.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. Will the Treasurer inform the House how the Morrison government is on the side of all Australians by returning the budget to surplus and getting more people into work? Is the Treasurer aware of any alternative policies?
The Treasurer has the call.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker. And I want to congratulate the member for Longman, because in his first speech today he talked about owning a couple of golf shop franchises, and his first speech was a hole-in-one, Mr Speaker, because it was a brilliant speech about his personal experiences, his ideals and what he wants to do for the people of Longman. And his first speech explained why Longman went from being on that side of the House to being on this side of the House, Mr Speaker.
The Treasurer can just pause for a second. It's entertaining, but 30 seconds of it's a bit long. We're getting. I think we can.
Longman knows that the fundamentals of the Australian economy are strong, that Australia is in its 28th consecutive year of economic growth. As the Governor has reminded us, the foundations of the Australian economy are strong. We have a AAA credit rating, Mr Speaker. We have 17 consecutive months of trade surpluses, Mr Speaker, and we will be delivering a budget surplus the first time in more than a decade, Mr Speaker. And we have done that by responsible and targeted spending. The rate of spending growth is around half of what we inherited, Mr Speaker. There are more people in jobs and less people in welfare, Mr Speaker, and the proportion of working-age Australians on welfare is around the lowest levels in 30 years, Mr Speaker. And we inherited from those opposite $240 billion of accumulated deficits, an unemployment rate which was at 5.7%, and employment growth at only 0.7%, and a gender pay gap at 17.2%, Mr Speaker. And on all indicators, we have strengthened the economy, and a strong economy, because we are on the side of hard-working Australians. A strong economy allows us to deliver tax cuts, Mr Speaker, for more than 13 million Australians. Now, Mr Speaker, we know that those opposite and the Leader of the Opposition has had every position under the sun. He was against the tax cuts, then he was for the tax cuts. He wanted to change the name of the bill, Mr Speaker. He wanted to wait for those in the upper house. But I tell you what, today we got the real explanation in the Australian newspaper when he was explaining his position on tax cuts. Wait for it. He said, "We will agree with measures we disagree with," Mr Speaker. This is exactly what happened with the tax cuts, Mr Speaker. So, Mr Speaker, the reality is the Leader of the Opposition doesn't know on whose side he's on. We, on this side of the House, are always on the side of hard-working Australians because we want Australians to earn more and to keep more of what they earn.
The member for McMahon has the call.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Health. Why did the minister yesterday claim that the granting of an MRI Medicare licence to Sound Radiology was, and I quote, done through an independent process, when in fact they were signed off by him in his ministerial office?
The Minister for Health has the call.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and that is not an accurate representation of what I said. As I confirmed in the House, final decisions were made.
Can the minister just please just pause for a second? The minister's been completely relevant, but I'm struggling to hear him. The member for Ballarat is preventing me hearing the Minister for Health. I think the member for McMahon wants to listen to the answer. I need to, so if she could stop interjecting, that would assist everyone. The Minister for Health has the call.
Final decisions were made by the minister, as they were by the member for Sydney, sitting right next to him.
The member for McMahon.
Well, there are two parts to this. As I said yesterday, no.
Members on my left.
No. Each application was assessed by the department against the mandatory and substantive criteria outlined in the ITA documentation, and all MRI licences allocated under the expansion round met the department's criteria. And as I said in the House yesterday, the final decisions were signed off by the minister. Now, this is very interesting. Absolutely. This is very interesting because I've been doing a little bit of research into historic processes in this space, and I was hoping he might intervene, because this morning the Leader of the Opposition gave an interview in South Australia where he referred to what the Labor Party did, and he made 4 errors in 1 minute in one answer on this. And apart from misrepresenting what we said yesterday, he also said that Labor went through a process and these matters were determined as they were. But in fact, we have gone back and we know from the ANAO report that they were determined by the minister. He also said, and I quote, "People weren't making a profit by definition of an MRI machine in a hospital. Labor awarded these licences to hospitals, to public hospitals." Well, I actually go to the member for Sydney's release of the 1st of November 2012, and the member for Sydney announced 11 licences in South Australia, and I would just list some of them: Dr. Jones and Partner, Tennyson Centre, Adelaide area, Adelaide Diagnostic Imaging in Woodville, Dr. Jones and Partners in South Terrace, one in North Terrace in Adelaide. What we see is Benson Radiology, Salisbury, Benson Radiology, North Adelaide. All of these show that what the Leader of the Opposition said on this morning was absolute bunkum. Absolute bunkum. What he said is that the difference is that Labor awarded these licences to hospitals, to public hospitals, that went through processes, so people weren't making a profit by definition. And that may be why the ANAO looked at what Labor did and slammed the member for Sydney. So not only
the minister will pause. The minister will just pause for a second. The Minister for Health will pause. The member for Ballarat will leave under 94A. The minister has the call.
And indeed, the ANA's overall conclusion was, as a consequence, the cost impact of the MRI expansion has been significantly greater than advised to government, with long-term implications for the Commonwealth budget. Labor never could manage health, and they've been caught out.
The member for Sturt has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Industry, Science and Technology. Will the minister update the House on how the Morrison government is on the side of all Australians who believe in the future of manufacturing in Australia to grow and create jobs?
The Minister for Industry, Science and Technology.
Thank you, Mr
Members
Speaker.
on my left.
And I thank the member for his question, and what a wonderful member for Sturt he is. Mr Speaker, Australia will always be a manufacturing nation. That's why our government is unashamedly on the side of our manufacturers and those Australians who work in and believe in manufacturing. Now, this morning I hosted a manufacturing roundtable where we had a number of representatives from industry, our researchers were there, major manufacturing businesses were clearly there today. It was a very productive discussion on what we could do to support manufacturing businesses into the future, to make sure that we are working with our competitive strengths as we build a future for manufacturing in this country. And there was a real confidence around the table that Australia's best years of manufacturing are ahead of us. Currently, manufacturing supports about 850,000 jobs in this country and contributes about 5.8% of GDP, and we plan on growing that. And the good news is that the value of our manufacturing exports has already grown by around 23% since 2013. Now, I acknowledge that the manufacturing sector has faced many transitional challenges, including under Labor, when 1 in 8 manufacturing jobs were lost. That's right. Now, those transitional challenges are being overcome, and congratulations to our manufacturing industries for what they have managed to achieve through innovation. Because what they're doing is focusing on their need to compete on value rather than compete on costs. Mr Speaker, manufacturing isn't only about production. There are many parts to the manufacturing spectrum. It includes research and development, it includes design, it includes sales, it includes service. Now, what we are seeing is our manufacturing businesses innovating every single day so that they can become more efficient, so that their products continue to be of high value, not just in Australia but right across the world, because it's very important for our manufacturing businesses to grow that we develop the export markets that they need now and into the future. So we're working very proactively very positively with our manufacturing businesses here in Australia. We're making sure that they will have the skilled workforce that they need to produce the right products that they need. Mr Speaker, let me say this. Under the Morrison government, we are making manufacturing great again.
The Manager of Opposition Business.
Thanks, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Industrial Relations. Why did he advise the House that the former Labor government cut funding to the Fair Work Ombudsman by 17%, when in fact it increased funding by 96%? Why did he also claim that staff were cut by 20%, when in fact staffing rose by 97%?
The Minister for Industrial Relations.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. So I advised the House that when Labor were last in office, they cut funding to the Fair Work Ombudsman by 17% and their staffing by 20%. The reason I advised the House of that is because it's true. And what happened with the funding was that it grew over time and it reached a peak, and then when you were struggling around for your 4 surpluses delivered in one night, you chopped the feet out from under them. That's what you did. And the funding went radically down, and the staffing went radically down, and the number of investigations went radically down, and Australian workers who wanted a robust organisation to investigate underpayment were left in the lurch. That's what happened, and that's why I informed the House of that. And the reason that you raised this now and the reason that you raised it yesterday is we have 2 bills before the House today that are actually there to demonstrably help workers. And how are they going to do that? They are going to establish basic rules of transparency around workers' benefit funds. They are going to ensure that there is lawfulness on work sites. And what is really interesting is that last year the Australian Building and Construction Commission recovered $1 million worth of underpaid wages for workers. And what do members opposite want to do to that? They want to get rid of it. So they cut the funding of the Fair Work Ombudsman, which investigates underpayment, and the other great organisation that is recovering underpaid wages, they want to scrap entirely. So the reason why we're informing the parliament and the people of the truth is because it's a truth that they need and want to know.
The member for Wide Bay.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Indigenous Australians. Will the minister update the House on how the Morrison government is on the side of Indigenous families who want their children to get the best start in life?
The Minister for Indigenous Australians has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I thank the member for Wide Bay for his ongoing interest in the journey that young Indigenous Australians take, not only through education but through their life and the work that you do within your electorate. The Morrison government is committed to delivering better futures for our Indigenous children and youth across this nation. The journey starts in the early childhood years through to higher education. The Morrison government is investing around $230 million through the Indigenous Advancement Strategy in the 2019-2020 budget to consolidate this important journey. Because we know of the early years of a young person's life, experiences are shaped for later life in their journey. And I just want to cite a couple of figures off the document I have in front of me. Investing a record level of funding for schools with $310.3 billion from 2018 to 2019, including $5.2 billion loading for Indigenous students, $81.5 million for remote schools attendance strategy, in which we are seeing the outcomes occurring. We're ensuring that mentoring, residential facilities and pathways to complete secondary education is augmented with the AB-Study program, and you would have become familiar with the $200 million Indigenous youth education package that the Prime Minister announced in February. Creating pillars for adults and young people into a journey is often manifested, and last night I had the privilege of being with the British High Commissioner, in which she announced 3 young Indigenous women who are heading off to the United Kingdom to study at Cambridge and Oxford. Those 3 are studying in fields that are very particular to their interests and what will make a difference when they come back to their communities and to Australia. And we've been operating this program for 10 years, so that the journey is demonstrating the capability of young people. They become role models within their own communities when they come back. Investing a further $35 million to support Indigenous women and families experiencing violence, and $2.5 million for e-safety. But the important outcomes from all of this is, as a result of our record investment, there's been a 60% increase of retention rates from year 7-8 to year 12 in 2018 compared to 48.7% in 2011. The other figure is an 8.1% increase in the number of Indigenous students enrolled in university courses in 2017. That's a great outcome in the journey that will build the capacity of our communities. But more importantly is the 54% increase in the number of Indigenous students taking vet pathways. This weekend I'm going to Gama along with many others, and I'm looking forward to hearing the voices of young people in what they express as the desires that they have as aspirations. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The time has concluded. The member for Cooper.
Question is to the Minister for Health. The Minister for Home Affairs said Australians who were in waiting lines at public hospitals would be, and I quote, kicked off those waiting lines because people from Nauru and Manus are now going to access those health services. Minister, did that happen?
The Minister has the call.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And the significant thing that has happened is this government took steps through the Prime Minister to make sure that there wasn't a waiting list of people coming to the mainland. That was what the Prime Minister did when he opened up Christmas Island, and that was a significant step in making sure that we did not encounter the very problem that the Minister for Home Affairs warned about. The Minister for Home Affairs identified the problem, the Prime Minister solved it.
The member for Bass.
Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Minister for Regional Services, Decentralisation and Local Government and Assistant Minister for Trade and Investment. Will the Minister update the House on how the Morrison government is on the side of Australian exporters by opening up new markets across a range of industries and helping to build a stronger economy and create more jobs?
Including in Tasmania.
The Minister for Regional Services, Decentralisation and Local Government.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank the member for Bass for a question. And I know the member is on the side of exporters in northern Tasmania. I've got to say I got a chance to meet those exporters late last year when I was down there hosting a free trade seminar, and they certainly are a very productive and innovative area. This government is getting on with making it easier for our exporters to connect to the rest of the world, selling our produce and our services. Mr. Speaker, the latest data shows that there's nearly 52,000 businesses that export from Australia, and that's a 16% increase. So if you look over the last 5 years, Mr. Speaker, this government has created over an additional 240,000 trade-related jobs. So that's 240,000 Australians that now have a job, thanks to our commitment to increasing jobs and boosting the economy by making it easier to connect our exporters to the rest of the world. And Mr. Speaker, trade is critical. Trade is critical. I'm pleased that the honourable member is interested in trade, because I don't think in their term of government they managed to sign one free trade agreement. So it would be so they will be interested. So they will be interested to know that this government has delivered free trade agreements to China, Japan, Korea, and the gold standard of them all, the TPP-11. And indeed, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I was honoured to be in Tokyo in January to represent Australia at the inaugural ministerial meeting for the TPP-11 countries. This agreement not only connects to countries in the local area, but also gives preferential access to Canada and Mexico. So this means that Australian exporters now have access to 2.8 billion consumers from around the world. These agreements are opening up our export opportunities to manufactured goods, education and financial services, as well as agricultural technology. This weekend, Senator Birmingham will be in China to represent Australia at the next round of negotiations for the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. And at the same time, our negotiators are working with the European Union and the Pacific Alliance to work on future trade agreements. Mr Speaker, trade now has contributed to a quarter of Australia's economic growth over the past 5 years. That means we now have a stronger economy which provides essential services which Australians rely on. But there's more to come. Australia now has signed an FTA with Indonesia, Peru and Hong Kong. And there's an opportunity for those opposite to show interest in these agreements as they will be shortly coming to the House for ratification. It's an opportunity for this House to support Australian exporters.
The minister's time has concluded. The member for Brand.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Assistant Minister for Trade and Investment. In his last question, the minister said that Labor didn't sign a trade agreement in its last term of government. Is that true?
The minister has the call. The minister has the call.
I will reiterate that in this term of government, our government has signed they did not sign the agreements that this government has done.
The minister to resume his seat. Members on my left will cease interjecting. I just have to point out again it was a very specific question based on the minister's previous answer, and I'll call the minister. The minister needs to address the question.
I can say when this government came to power, 30% of our trade was covered by free trade agreements. It is now 70%.
Yes, the Leader of the Opposition. I was about to ask the minister to resume his seat. Has he concluded his answer? The Leader of the Opposition can either ask a question or I can call the member for Blaxland.
I just might give the minister the opportunity to correct the record, because there are forms of the House which will have to be used otherwise, because that is a misleading of the Parliament. He can fix it up.
Well, I just say to the Leader of the Opposition, just to resume his seat, the Leader of the Opposition, as much as he might like to, can't give the call to anybody. I'm going to make that very clear. The question's been asked. The Minister for Health, the question's been asked. I made it very clear the minister wasn't being relevant in his answer, and he's now concluded his answer, which is his right. And if there are other issues at other times in the House, that's a matter for members. It's not a matter for me. My job is to enforce the rules, which I've done, and I just made it very clear I'd asked the minister to be relevant, and in the few sentences that followed, he wasn't, but he's concluded his answer, which is his right. Now I'm going to call the. No. We're not going to break into a sort of day-long dialogue on the subject. Okay. The member for Dawson actually has the call.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Defence Industry. Will the minister update the House on how the Morrison government's record investment in the defence industry is delivering Australian jobs, opportunities for small business, and ensuring that our defence force is well equipped?
The Minister for Defence Industry. The minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I would like to thank the member for Dawson for his question and his strong passion for creating defence industry jobs and opportunities in the Australian defence industry, especially in northern Queensland. The Morrison government, Mr. Speaker, is on the side of Australians who work in our defence industry. Australians like those that the member for Dawson and I recently met in Townsville when we visited Cubic Defence Australia along with the member for Herbert. Cubic Defence provided the essential training, support and technologies, Mr. Speaker, for use by all nations participating in the Talisman Sabre exercise. Cubic continues to play a fundamental role in the defence industry by providing realistic simulation training to the ADF. Cubic is also a major employer of defence veterans, and I'd like to take the opportunity, Mr Speaker, to congratulate them on that. And I know that this is an issue that the member for Herbert is also particularly passionate about. It is businesses like Cubic, Mr Speaker, that the Morrison government is backing every day, because they are the backbone of the Australian economy. Just last night, Mr Speaker, I, together with the Minister for Defence, hosted an event for small businesses in the defence industry and outlined our plan to deliver more opportunities for them, together with more jobs in the defence industry. And tonight, Mr Speaker, I have the pleasure of addressing the Defence Industry Awards, where I will be able to recognise the outstanding achievements of small businesses in our Australian defence industry. These small businesses, Mr Speaker, play a crucial role in delivering the capability that our men and women in uniform rely upon each and every day. Mr Speaker, the Morrison government is on the side of the Australian workers in the defence industry. Mr Speaker, unlike those opposite, under Labor, the defence budget was cut by $18 billion. During that time that Labor occupied these benches, those long, dark 6 years.
Just got to say that the minister needs to pause. There's a problem with the area she's now going. If members can cease interjecting, I'll just address the area. She's now going to alternative policies, but unfortunately for her, this question did not have that phrase. Are there any alternative policies? And I can't. Members on my left, and so I can't permit her to do that because she's seeking to answer a question she wasn't asked.
This government is very committed to creating thousands and thousands of jobs with respect to our $200 billion defence industry white paper. While those opposite were sitting on this side, Mr Speaker, they lost thousands of Australian jobs. We have a plan for the future. They had no plan for the future, Mr Speaker. The Morrison government is on track to secure the thousands of future jobs in the Australian defence industry and, just as important, Mr Speaker, to ensuring our nation's defence capability.
The member for Burt.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Defence Industry. Why did the government say that 90% of the work on the submarine project would be Australian when it won't be?
The Minister for Defence Industry. Members on my left, the member for Shortland is warned. The minister has the
Mr Speaker, back in 2016 we announced our $200 billion Australian Defence White Paper. Included in that is our $90 billion naval shipbuilding program. There will be thousands of opportunities within that naval shipbuilding program with respect to jobs for Australians, small businesses. There is an enormous supply chain with respect to shipbuilding, and we aren't done yet.
The member for Higgins.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for the Environment. Will the minister update the House on how the Morrison government is on the side of Australians concerned with reducing our waste, increasing our domestic recycling capacity and keeping plastics out of our ocean?
The Minister for the Environment.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and can I thank the member for Higgins for her question, congratulate her on her outstanding start in this parliament, and note, as many members do, that she is a paediatrician by qualification, and I met one of her patients at the Melbourne Zoo recently, Estelle, the spider monkey, who had had some early feeding problems. The member for Higgins is also a very keen conservationist, and she's often seen with her communities cleaning up along the banks of the Yarra, particularly around Gardeners Creek. We're taking national leadership on waste and recycling. We've appointed the first ever Assistant Minister for Waste Reduction, the energetic member for Brisbane. We've invested $20 million in a cooperative research centre, and I thank the Minister for Industry, to look at innovative solutions to plastics recycling. But we've really come to the table, Mr Speaker, with $100 million for a new recycling investment fund. This is about bringing good ideas to us for manufacturing energy-efficient recycled content. We're working with our Pacific neighbours, $16 million to the Pacific Ocean Litter Project. This is about plastic in the ocean. By 2050, there could be more plastic in the ocean than fish, which is a horrifying statistic. We need to take that neighbourly and international leadership. We've given recently $1.6 million to Planet Ark, an organisation well known to many members of this House, and what they do is match recyclables with a business that needs that recyclable. And if you've seen their amazing floor tiles that are made out of recycled ground coffee and plastic cups, you will know exactly what I mean. I met with representatives of local government today. They are encouraged by the agenda that we're setting in this space, because we do need all levels of government on board. Waste is not a problem. We shouldn't see it as a problem. We should see it as an economic opportunity, not a problem to be solved. And that opportunity can mean that the curbside litter, the glass and plastic you put in your bins today, Australians want to see that on the roads they drive on tomorrow. We want to see waste in the real economy as part of a supply chain for a product that is demanded, that is part, as I said, of that circular economy. Mr Speaker, we're on the side of Australians who want to do the right thing, who want to have confidence that their government, like them, cares about the environment, both locally and nationally. We're on the side of Australians who know that this circular economy can be part of the jobs of the future.
The member for Blaxland.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Family and Social Services. Why did the Assistant Minister for Homelessness claim that the rate of homelessness is, quote, not ahead of population growth, when in fact homelessness is growing at nearly double the rate of Australia's population?
The Minister has the call.
I do thank the Shadow Minister for his question. Our Morrison government has a very strong track record when it comes to housing, including very significant funding, over $1.5 billion under the National Housing and Homelessness Agreement to support homelessness services. And under that agreement, $125 million is set aside for homelessness services in 2019-20. The states are matching this funding and have a focus on women and children affected by family and domestic violence. And of course, the Prime Minister earlier this year announced that hundreds more women and children escaping domestic and family violence would have a safe place to sleep, with a $78 million investment by the Morrison government, including forming part of our $328 million investment to support the fourth action plan of the National Plan to Reduce Violence Against Women and their Children. I would certainly hope, Mr Speaker, that there is acknowledgement on all sides of the House of the bipartisan commitment to the importance of government action in this area under the fourth action plan of the National Plan to Reduce Violence Against Women and their Children. And of course, as part of that, Mr Speaker, one of the very practical ways in which we are responding to the challenge of homelessness is $60 million in grants to eligible organisations to provide new or expanded emergency accommodation facilities, as well as $18 million to support the Keeping Women Safe in Their Homes initiative. So, Mr Speaker, we have a strong program and commitment when it comes to homelessness, $1.5 billion, and of course funding which can be provided thanks to our strong management of the economy.
The member for Isaacs is warned. The member for Lindsay has the
Thank
call.
you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Population, Cities and Urban Infrastructure. Will the minister please update the House on how the Morrison government is on the side of all Australians frustrated at getting a car park to catch the train to work?
Minister for Population, Cities and Urban Infrastructure.
Well, can I thank the member for Lindsay for her question? And she, like so many people on our side of the House, just understand the immense frustration that commuters have when they want to take the train to and from work each day but can't get a car park at the local train station. And often that means that when they go to the train station, instead of being able to get there at 7 a.m, find a car park and jump on the train, they're searching around, perhaps have to park illegally, or perhaps they have to go to the next train station to try to find a car park, or even still, many people then end up giving up and driving all the way into town to their destination, adding further congestion to the roads in the process. And there's 3 train stations in particular that I know the member for Lindsay is very concerned about, and in particular Emu Plains train station, which she's very familiar with. It's one of those ones that does fill up at 7 o'clock in the morning and then creates frustrations for commuters. And it's a train station where people from all around the area do go to try to find a car park, including from the lower Blue Mountains, and yet are unable to find car parks after 7 a.m. Now, this is happening right across our big cities, Mr Speaker, and we've got a plan to fix some of these things. We've got a plan to address those 3 key car parks in the member for Lindsay's electorate, which she has advocated for, and that includes the Emu Plains one. Of course, it includes St Mary's train station car park, as well as Kingswood station as well. We'll be adding more commuter car parks to those train stations so that commuters can find the car park, jump on the train and get to work more quickly and sooner and safer. And our plan, in fact, funds 47 commuter car parks right across our big capital cities. And all up, this will make it easier for everyday residents to be able to take the train to work and back every day. But not only does it make it easier for them, but it has a direct impact as well, Mr Speaker, on addressing congestion on our major roads, because by doing our plan for 47 commuter car parks, we will take almost 17,000 cars off the roads in the process. 17,000 cars that otherwise would have been on those major freeways or the major roads, adding to congestion, which people get so frustrated about. Of course, we're also doing those local pinch point roads as well, including in the member for Lindsay's electorate, such as Dunheved Road, which is a really busy road, and we're going to be fixing that one, Malgora Road as well, which is one of the busiest roads in Western Sydney. And of course, we're doing other city-shaping roads to support people in Lindsay, including West Connects, a road which the Leader of the Opposition says a road is a road to no.
I call the member for Maribyrnong.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Government Services. The government has given an absolute undertaking that debt recovery in the Townsville area hasn't commenced. Why was that absolute undertaking given when people in Townsville are currently receiving debt recovery notices as recently as this month, including this $2,000 robo-debt issued on the 8th of July?
The Minister for Government Services has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Let me thank the member for his question. We as a government are committed to supporting people impacted by natural disasters, and the far north Queensland floods are no different. During natural disasters such as cyclones, bushfires or floods, it's routine practice for the Department of Human Services to temporarily suspend all compliance activities within an affected local area. This occurred in New South Wales and Victoria after devastating bushfires earlier this year, as well as in previous natural disasters under governments of all persuasions. I think we'd all agree it's the right thing to do. As a general rule, this suspension is in place for 6 months unless extended. I have asked the department to extend
the absence of debt recovery in northern Queensland for the foreseeable future until I am satisfied that the region has recovered. For the benefit of the House, when the department sends a notification to a citizen, this is what the notification says, and I'll table it so we're all clear exactly what communication is sent to Australians. It says we need you to check and update your past income information. We need to make sure that you receive the right amount of payments from us in the past. The ATO has given us information about how much income you earned from work in the past. The information from the ATO is different to the information you've reported to us. We need your help to check and update your information. You need to do this even if you haven't received any Centrelink payments for a while. It then has in a nice big black box what you need to do. You've got 28 days from when you receive the letter to update your information. Over the page you'll find the information we have received from the ATO. Please check this carefully and then go to humanservices.gov.au/confirm income, select Start Here, or go to MyGov. Documents like pay slips or bank statements will help you do this. We understand you may not be able to get to these quickly. That's okay. You can ask for more time if you need it. If you don't check and update your information, we'll use the details we already have, including the information from the ATO. This might mean you have to pay back money. If you need help, go to humanservices.gov.au/check past income or call us on a specific number. I table that documentation for the benefit of the House so everyone can be quite clear as to the type of information that the department sends out. It is sensitive. It doesn't seek to raise a debt in the first instance. It simply says to Australians there is a discrepancy between what your assessment is and what the ATO has told us, and please call us. And I reiterate to all Australians, if you receive a letter like that, call the department, because the department is here to assist.
The member for Boothby.
Mr Speaker, my question is to the Minister for Industrial Relations. Will the Minister inform the House how the Morrison government is on the side of Australian workers and is endeavouring to protect their benefit funds from the actions of militant unions? Is the Minister aware of any other approaches on this important issue?
The Minister for Industrial Relations and Attorney-General.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for her question. Of course, workers' benefits funds are meant to keep capital amounts safe and sound for future needs like severance payments. We have a bill before the House that would require proper, transparent public recording of what goes into the funds, what comes out of the funds and what the money is distributed on. We know from last week that Protect transferred $32 million to the Electrical Trades Union. We know that $10.4 million of that went to the employer organisation NECA. And we say that that is precisely the type of transaction that should properly be accounted for and should be transparent, should be knowable to workers whose money it is. Members opposite say don't worry about this. And we had the ultimate don't worry yesterday from the Shadow Minister, who went on radio explaining that he'd looked into it over the weekend. And he's explained that $32 million transaction this way, quote, "Instead of distributing the earnings, interest and things like that each year for the sorts of programs I've described, they waited a few years before they did it, and so technically the previous year's earnings get recorded as though they were capital, but what was distributed out was simply 3 years of earnings. The money that is required for entitlements is still there." End quote. Now, it's a technical $32 million accounting mistake. That's what it is. Are we all feeling comforted? Well, I see a few problems with that. Problem number one, if they, quote, waited a few years before they distributed the earnings, you might expect that the earnings distributed out in the previous years would have been close to zero. Wrong. 2014, $971,000 to the ETU, 2015, $1.5 million, 2016, $975,000, and then the whopping $32 million in 2017. Second problem, the ETU accounts don't just say it's capital once, they say it's twice. They record it as capital, and then they say this: the ETU has entered into a loan agreement with Protect to loan back the capital distributed to the ETU if Protect needs to recall the distribution to meet ongoing expenses, which leads to the third problem. But don't worry, the Shadow Minister says the money that is required for entitlements is still there. Well, if it's still in Protect, why do you need a loan facility to loan back the money in case it's needed by the members of Protect for severance payments. The fourth problem is, if it wasn't capital but rather accumulated earnings for several years, you'd probably expect that the next year would again be a low amount, just a lazy million. But hot off the press are the 2018 accounts. And do you want to know how much money was sent by Protect to the ETU in 2018? $2 million, $4 million, $10 million, $12 million. That is a whopping $45 million in 2 years, which leads to this ultimate question. If we suspend all disbelief and believe that this is an accounting mistake and it's actually accrued earnings, like if we accept that, surely this question is relevant. What is the $45 million being spent on? What accounts for how that money is being spent? That's what we want to know.
The Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is addressed to the Prime Minister. In May, the Prime Minister said that his government had, and I quote, introduced and passed legislation to deal with the threat of wildlife extinction. Legislation which at the time didn't exist and still doesn't. Why does the Prime Minister just make stuff up?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I thank the member for his question on wildlife extinction. And, Mr Speaker, our government is committed to taking action on the concerns of Australians when it comes to protecting the local quality of our environment. And I particularly want to commend the member for Latrobe, now the Assistant Minister. The member for Latrobe, during the last election and in the leading up to that election, mounted a campaign amongst his local community to ensure that our government was taking action to protect species, Mr Speaker. And that's what our government has been doing, and that's what we will contend to keep doing.
Just the members on both sides. I've just asked the member for Clark to resume his seat. The call alternates. I've made this point. We have this sort of difficulty at the same time every day. I think I've made the point several times, but perhaps I'm just dreaming it. But I think I have made it several times. The member for Leichhardt.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr Speaker. And my question is to Minister for Water Resources, Drought, Rural Finance, Natural Disaster and Emergency Management. My question to the Minister: will the Minister please explain to the House what the Morrison government is on the side of our North Queensland primary producers following the tragedy of the Queensland floods earlier this year?
The Minister for Water Resources has the call.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker, and can I thank the member for Leichhardt for his question and his leadership during that trying period. The sheer scale of that event is unimaginable. I was given the opportunity to see it firsthand as it unravelled, and it's something I've never seen. I hope I never see ever again. And I know the Prime Minister himself also made himself available to be there as this unravelled, and then revisited after being re-elected, because this is something that has really touched over 100,000 Australians. We lost 500,000 livestock in this event, and it's one of those events that we as a nation can take some solace out of, that when these events do happen, that we come together and we work collectively together. And this government, along with the Queensland government, announced a $242 million recovery package. We made sure that we were able to get boots on the ground as quickly as we can because we work collectively together. That was around putting an allowance, a disaster allowance, into households that were impacted, $1,000 per adult and $400 per child to help in the clean-up. But we also made sure that we understood the unique nature of this event on the agricultural sector, and we tasked Shane Stone with heading the recovery task. And I think this parliament, this nation, owes him a debt of thanks for what he is doing and continues to do. Because what we didn't want was a Canberra solution. We wanted a local solution. We want people on the ground listening at kitchen table to kitchen table, understanding farmers' needs. And proudly, we acted swiftly in terms of the disaster rebates, lifting it from $25,000 to $75,000 with a stroke of a pen straight away. We understood the magnitude of this event on those farmers. We also lifted it for small businesses because they also have been impacted by this, and we've lifted that to $50,000. And I announced today that I have extended the period for application for that program out till November.
We do not want anyone to self-assess, but we do not want anyone left behind. And I encourage those that were impacted by this flood to reach out and to actually ask, are you eligible? It's important that we help you recover, and so therefore the state government and the federal government are going to extend it out to November. We've also made sure that we've, for the first time, given one of the largest grant programs to primary producers, a $400,000 grant program for restocking and replanting. They lost their income in one event. This is about giving them a leg up to restart and to rebuild their communities. We also work with the Regional Investment Corporation to undertake agri-rebuild loans, $5 million to eligible farmers at concessional rates to help them reconstruct, to rebuild their businesses and to rebuild their families. This was a major event that we will not forget. Those Queenslanders are not forgotten, and this government will continue to stand shoulder to shoulder with them.
The Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I ask that further questions be placed on the notice paper.